Welcome in now, retired Air Force General Blaine Holt for more perspective on Vladimir Putin's trip to Iran. Great to have you with us, General.
Great to be with both of you today.
A lot of people are, questioning the timing of all of this. First, General Holt, Putin's leaving his country in the middle of this ongoing conflict, going to Iran. Biden just left the region. We're curious, from your perspective, what is the message he wants to send to the U.S. and really what is on the agenda here? A face-to-face meeting in Iran. There's no record of what's being said there.
Well, it's great to be with you. The cover story doesn't really add up here. So you have this, we're going to talk about Syria, we're going to talk about the three leaders and how they differ on the Syrian question, and then the grain issues, and even a potential drone deal with the Iranians. But none of that, in my opinion, would be worth the risk for Putin to leave his nation when it's at war, when he's already seen an assassination attempt in his own staff, and he's vulnerable to assassination as well. So he's taking a tremendous risk just to have a face-to-face conversation that, as you know, cannot be interdicted by electronics. What are the men really going to talk about offline? That's what we need to find out, because it could be quite a dangerous conversation.
Yeah, you talked about that assassination attempt, but talk to us, too, about Vladimir Putin's second in command, Nikolai Patrushev. He is seen as the man who Putin trusts most. He's just been elevated to prime minister, or will be very soon. Talk to us about a possible succession plan in place in Russia, General.
Right, so we started to see just about a month ago articles reporting that Patrushev, who he's much more dogmatic than Putin is. In fact, he's the one that laid down the foundation and the predicate for the war in Ukraine, and actually got Putin convinced that the denazification needed to happen. So he's on his way in August to go be the prime minister, and here we see an assassination attempt by their favorite, poison that's ingested through the pores of the skin, and he nearly did not make it, is my understanding. And we just got reported a couple of days ago, and yet still Vladimir Putin, it's in his best interest to get to Tehran. So I find this very curious and something that has to be watched very carefully.
And obviously, also not just there, the Ayatollah is the president of Turkey, a NATO member. He has in-person meetings,
right.
Very significant. While he's talking some tough talk about icing out Finland and Sweden from their NATO membership process, you mentioned it, Syria, the threat there, Russia and Iran obviously do not want to see Syria. Turkey, though, is threatening military operations. What is happening during these talks?
So each of the men are going to have leverage points with each other. What I'm very concerned about is the president of Turkey doesn't seem to have consulted with NATO, doesn't seem to have consulted with allies. He's taking a unilateral step in talking to adversaries and in one case an enemy of NATO, or both cases. And so what type of deal will he broker? He's sitting in a country that has 80% hyperinflation, and they have significant grain issues. In fact, there's been reporting that the Turks have in fact bought stolen grain from the Russians. So what we need to find out is, what will these men agree to, and then do we still have a valid, reliable partner on the Turkish side?
And I think that's the exact question we have to be asking, is if we can trust Recep Erdogan to be an honest broker on behalf of NATO in these discussions. And I would imagine, General, that there aren't a lot of other NATO states that trust Erdogan in this role.
Well, the Turkish have been very tough negotiators throughout NATO's history since their membership started, and they saw advantage in things that they wanted, weapons-wise, concessions on the Kurdish prisoners in Scandinavian countries, and now they seem to be backing away from that and actually threatening to pull away from that deal. And here they come. So again, what will they answer for? And is our diplomacy, and we just recently saw this trip in the Middle East not really amount to much, is our diplomacy being effective with partners and allies? We know that Erdogan has a food and an energy and an inflation problem, and the United States is going to have to figure out a way to reach them.
Yeah, when we've seen this in the past, too, when push comes to shove and Erdogan's backed into a corner, he does what's best for Turkey, not necessarily what's best for NATO.
That's exactly right. But if that's going to happen, Europe and the United States and Canada are going to actually have to be there for the Turkish, because they're one of these countries, much like you saw in Sri Lanka, Egypt, Pakistan. Their economies are literally blowing up from the inflation and from the lack of fuel and the lack of grains, which the Russians are exacerbating with their war in Ukraine. And we're trying very hard to get that food out of that country.
And do you think there could be that deal brokered with the UN and on the grain this week? You say that's very significant. Do you think it's a possibility? Just about 30 seconds here, General Holt.
It's certainly a possibility. It's what we should all hope for. But the Western world's going to have to come around this and logistically get the food moving out one way or another. And so we have to watch that and be very careful about it. Food is going to be the big problem.
And you can't put too much stock in anything coming out of the UN these days. General Holt, great to see you. Thanks so much.
Great analysis. Thank you, General.
Great to be with both of you.